Your boss has the title, the office, the salary, the official authority. But you're about to learn something that will change how you see every hierarchy you'll ever be part of. Title is not power. Position is not influence. Authority on paper means nothing if you understand what Francis Bacon understood. Real power in any organization flows not to the person with the highest rank, but to the person who controls what matters. The information, the relationships, the resources, the narrative. And once you control these things, your boss's title becomes irrelevant. They have the name. You have the power. Bacon proved this throughout his career. He spent years technically subordinate to men who were officially more powerful, but in practice, he was the one making decisions, shaping outcomes, controlling the flow of events. He understood something most people never learn. The org chart is a fiction, a convenient story organizations tell themselves about how power works. But real power, the kind that actually determines what happens, operates on different principles entirely. Principles that have nothing to do with whose name is higher on the organizational chart. This isn't about undermining your boss or sabotaging the system. This is about understanding how influence actually works in organizational structures and positioning yourself to accumulate that influence regardless of your formal title. So let's break down Francis Bacon's 7 rules for outranking your boss without ever getting their promotion. Rule 1. Control the information flow. Bacon's first and most critical rule. In any organization, power flows to whoever controls information, not just possessing information, but controlling its flow. Who knows what, when they know it, how they know it. If you position yourself as the central node through which important information passes, you become more powerful than anyone, including your boss, regardless of title. Think about how this works practically. Your boss might have the authority to make decisions, but if you're the one who determines what information they receive, what context they have, what options they're aware of, you're shaping their decisions without them realizing it. You're not overruling them. You're not contradicting them. You're simply ensuring that the information ecosystem they're operating in leads them to the conclusions you want them to reach. Bacon was masterful at this. He positioned himself as the person people came to with information. He made himself the clearinghouse, the person who knew what was happening across different domains, the connector who could provide context others lacked. And once you're that person, you don't need formal authority. People come to you for guidance because you have the most complete picture. You become the de facto decision maker because your information advantage makes your judgment more reliable than anyone else's, including those officially above you. The practical application is to systematically position yourself as an information hub. Be the person who knows what's happening in different departments, who understands the context of decisions, who can explain why things are the way they are. Make yourself the translator between silos, the explainer of complexity, the person with the complete picture when everyone else only sees fragments. Once you have that position, formal authority becomes almost irrelevant because everyone, including your boss, depends on you for the information they need to function. Rule 2. Make yourself the irreplaceable executor. Your boss can have strategic vision. They can make high-level decisions. They can represent the team to leadership. But if you're the one who actually knows how to execute, who understands the systems, who can make things happen, you're more valuable. And value in organizations translates to power even when it doesn't translate to title. Bacon understood that most people in leadership positions are somewhat detached from execution. They deal in abstractions, strategy, vision, politics, but they often don't understand the granular reality of how things actually get done. The systems, the relationships, the unwritten rules, the practical knowledge that makes the difference between things working and things failing. If you develop that knowledge, if you become the person who can actually execute while they can only direct, you become indispensable, and indispensable people have power that exceeds their rank. This doesn't mean just being technically competent. It means positioning yourself as the only person, or one of very few people, who truly understands how to navigate your organization's particular ecosystem to get results. You know which people need to be consulted, which processes can be shortened, which rules are actually enforced and which are just theater. You know how to work the system. And that knowledge makes you more powerful than people who only understand the formal structures. The tactic is to deliberately develop deep operational knowledge that your boss doesn't have. Don't just do your job. Understand the entire operational landscape. Know how things connect, where leverage points are, what the real constraints are versus the imagined ones. Become the person who can tell leadership, here's what will actually happen if you make that decision, with enough accuracy that they learn to consult you before deciding. At that point, you're effectively making decisions even though someone else has the title. Rule 3. Build relationships your boss doesn't have. Organizational power isn't just vertical, it's horizontal. If you have strong relationships across the organization, especially with other power centers your boss doesn't have access to, you have influence channels they lack. And those channels give you options and leverage that formal authority can't match. Bacon was obsessive about relationship building. He cultivated connections not just with those above him, but across the entire power structure. He made himself valuable to people in different domains. He created debts and reciprocal obligations. He positioned himself as a connector between different power centers, and this network gave him influence that operated independently of his formal position. He could make things happen through his network that others couldn't make happen through official channels. Think about this strategically. Your boss might have authority over your team, but if you have relationships with finance, with other department heads, with key decision makers elsewhere in the organization, you can often accomplish things your boss can't. You can get approvals they can't get, access resources they can't access, influence decisions they can't influence. Because you're not relying on formal authority, you're relying on relationship capital that operates outside the official hierarchy. The practical approach is to deliberately invest in relationships across organizational boundaries, not just networking for its own sake, but strategic relationship building with people who control resources, information, or decision-making in domains that matter to your objectives. Make yourself valuable to them. Create reciprocal value exchanges. Build genuine rapport. Over time, this network becomes a form of informal power that can often override formal hierarchy because you can accomplish through relationships what others can't accomplish through authority. Rule 4. Control the narrative. In organizations, perception often matters more than reality. How things are interpreted, how decisions are explained, what story gets told about events. Bacon understood that whoever controls the narrative controls how power is perceived and allocated. And if you're the one shaping how situations are interpreted, you have more influence than people with official authority who aren't managing the narrative. Your boss might make a decision, but if you're the one who explains that decision to the team, contextualizes it, frames its meaning, you're controlling how it's received and implemented. They made the call, but you're determining whether it's seen as brilliant leadership or questionable judgment, whether people buy in enthusiastically or comply reluctantly. The narrative you create determines the actual impact of their decision. This extends to how problems are framed. If you're the one who defines what the problem is, you're already controlling what solutions will be considered. Your boss might be the one who ultimately decides, but if you frame the problem in a way that makes your preferred solution the obvious choice, you've made their decision for them. They just don't realize it. Bacon used this constantly. He would frame situations in ways that made his preferred outcomes seem inevitable. He would describe problems in language that presupposed certain solutions. He would narrate events in ways that positioned him favorably and his rivals poorly. He understood that reality is interpreted through stories, and whoever tells the most compelling story about what's happening shapes how people respond. The skill to develop is strategic communication, not just reporting facts, but framing situations. When you communicate about projects, problems, or decisions, you're choosing what to emphasize, what to minimize, what context to provide, what implications to highlight. These choices shape perception. And if you're good at it, you can make your boss look brilliant when it serves you, and incompetent when it doesn't, all while seeming like you're just objectively reporting reality. Rule 5. Become the problem solver leadership relies on. Every organization has complex problems that leadership doesn't know how to solve. Technical challenges, political knots, resource constraints, If you can position yourself as the person who solves these problems when no one else can, you become more valuable than your boss regardless of comparative titles. Because solving problems that matter is what organizations actually care about, not organizational charts. Bacon made himself indispensable by developing a reputation for solving difficult problems, legal knots, political dilemmas, situations where others were stuck. He would analyze complex situations, find angles others missed, propose solutions that actually worked. And over time, leadership learned to come to him with their hardest problems, not to his superiors, to him, because he delivered results. This creates a dynamic where you're operating above your rank. Leadership is coming to you directly because they trust your judgment and capability. Your boss might still be your boss on paper, but in practice, you're functioning as a peer to higher levels of leadership because you're solving problems at that level. And once you're operating at that level, your formal position becomes increasingly irrelevant. The strategy is to deliberately take on complex problems that others avoid. Not impossible problems that will make you fail, but difficult ones where success would be notable. Develop a track record of delivering when stakes are high and solutions aren't obvious. Build a reputation for being the person who figures things out when others are stuck. Over time, this reputation becomes your informal rank. People treat you according to your capability and track record, not your title. And capability-based status often trumps title-based status in actual influence. Rule 6. Make your boss look good, while accumulating the credit that matters. This is subtle. Bacon understood that you need your boss to feel secure in their position while you're accumulating actual power. If they feel threatened, they'll move against you. But if you make them look good publicly while ensuring that people who matter know your actual contribution, you can rise in real influence while maintaining your boss's support. Publicly, you give your boss credit. You frame successes as their leadership. You position yourself as loyal execution of their vision. This keeps them from perceiving you as a threat. But privately, strategically, you ensure that key people understand your actual role. You let decision-makers know what you contributed. You build relationships where your capabilities are recognized. You position yourself so that when opportunities arise, people think of you, not your boss, even though publicly you've been deferring. Bacon did this masterfully. He would publicly praise the leadership of those above him while ensuring through private communications and strategic relationships that people who mattered understood his actual contributions. He got the credit that led to opportunities while his superiors got the credit that satisfied their egos. Everyone was happy. And he accumulated power while appearing loyal and unthreatening. The balance is crucial. If you're too obvious about taking credit, your boss becomes an enemy. If you're too invisible, you don't get the opportunities you deserve. The sweet spot is public deference with strategic private visibility to decision-makers who can advance you. Let your boss have the spotlight while you build the relationships and reputation that create real options. Rule 7. Develop options your boss doesn't have. The ultimate form of power in organizations is optionality. If your boss needs their job and you have options, you have leverage they lack. If you've made yourself valuable enough that you could leave and thrive elsewhere, you're negotiating from strength. If they're locked into their position with no alternatives, they're negotiating from weakness. Bacon understood that true power comes from not needing the power you have. This means deliberately building your capabilities, reputation, and network beyond your current organization. You're not just good at your job in this company, you're good at your function in the industry. You're known beyond your organization. You have relationships that could lead to opportunities elsewhere. You're developing skills that are transferable. You're building a reputation that's portable. When you have real options, you can take risks your boss can't. You can push back when it matters. You can advocate for positions without fear of reprisal. You can operate with a freedom that comes from knowing that losing this particular position wouldn't be catastrophic. And that freedom translates to influence because people can sense when someone genuinely doesn't need them versus when someone is dependent. Bacon cultivated multiple patrons, multiple income streams, multiple potential positions. He was never fully dependent on any single relationship or role. This gave him the ability to navigate political situations that destroyed others. When one patron fell, he had others. When one position became untenable, he had alternatives. His power came partly from his capability, but also from the fact that he always had options, which meant he could never be fully controlled. The practical approach is to actively develop your external value, not in a way that signals you're leaving, but in a way that ensures you could leave if you needed to. Build your professional network beyond your company. Develop skills that are in demand elsewhere. Create visibility in your industry. Make yourself attractive to other organizations. This external optionality translates to internal power because you're operating from choice rather than necessity. The dark reality of informal power. Here's what Bacon understood that most people never figure out. Organizations have two power structures. The formal structure, represented by org charts and titles and reporting relationships, and the informal structure, based on who actually influences decisions, controls resources, and shapes outcomes. Most people only see the formal structure. They think promotion is the only path to power. They focus on climbing the official ladder, and they miss the fact that the informal structure is often more powerful than the formal one. Bacon operated in the informal structure while maintaining his position in the formal one. He accumulated influence through the 7 rules: information control, execution capability, relationship networks, narrative control, problem-solving reputation, strategic credit management, and external optionality, while technically remaining subordinate to others. But in practice, he was often more powerful than people with higher official ranks because he controlled the mechanisms that actually determine outcomes. This creates an interesting dynamic. Your boss has the title and the formal authority. But if you control information, relationships, execution, and narrative, what does their authority actually mean? They can make decisions, but you're shaping what decisions they make through information control. They can give orders, but you're the one who determines whether those orders are actually effective through execution control. They can represent the team, but you're the one who controls how the team's work is perceived through narrative control. At a certain point, the question becomes, who actually has the power? The person with the title who depends on you for information, execution, relationships, and narrative, or you who could function without them but whom they couldn't function without? The title says one thing, the actual power dynamic says another, the risks and ethics. This approach is powerful, but it's not without risks. If your boss realizes what you're doing, if they perceive that you're accumulating power that threatens their position, they can move against you. They still have formal authority. They can fire you, sideline you, block your advancement, damage your reputation. So this strategy requires subtlety. You can't be obvious. You can't be threatening. You have to accumulate power while making your boss feel secure, ideally while making them look good. There's also an ethical dimension. Is it right to accumulate power without title? To have more influence than your formal position suggests? Bacon would say this is just understanding how organizations actually work, that formal structures and informal power have always coexisted, that recognizing and navigating informal power is just being realistic about organizational dynamics. But others would argue there's something manipulative about this, that if you're effectively functioning above your rank, you should either be promoted to that rank or you should operate within your formal position. That accumulating informal power while remaining in a subordinate role creates dishonesty in organizational relationships. The counter-argument is that organizations often fail to recognize and reward actual contribution, that formal promotion processes are political and often unfair, that waiting for formal recognition means waiting forever for many capable people, that taking informal power is simply compensating for organizational failures to properly allocate formal power, that if organizations were good at recognizing and rewarding contribution, informal power accumulation wouldn't be necessary. Wherever you land on the ethics, the reality is that informal power exists. Some people will accumulate it deliberately, others won't even notice it's possible. And in practice, the people who understand and leverage informal power often have more influence over organizational outcomes than those who only focus on formal promotion. The long game. Bacon's approach wasn't about staying in subordinate positions forever. It was about accumulating power first and letting formal recognition follow. He built informal influence until it became impossible to ignore, until the gap between his formal position and his actual influence became so obvious that promotion was inevitable. He made himself so valuable, so connected, so influential that denying him formal recognition would have been organizational malpractice. This is the ultimate play. You're not accumulating informal power instead of formal promotion. You're accumulating informal power as the foundation for inevitable formal promotion. You're building such undeniable value and influence that promotion becomes a formality, an acknowledgement of a power reality that already exists rather than a granting of new power. When you approach it this way, you're not competing with your boss for their position. You're building a case for a different position, one that recognizes your actual scope of influence. You're not trying to take their job. You're demonstrating that you're operating at a level that deserves a different job. And often, organizations will create positions or find positions to properly recognize and retain people who've accumulated this level of informal power. Practical implementation. So how do you actually do this? How do you start accumulating power without title while avoiding the risks? Start with information. Begin positioning yourself as someone who knows what's happening across organizational boundaries. Have coffee with people in other departments. Attend meetings you don't have to attend. Read widely within your organization. Ask questions. Build a mental map of how your organization actually works, not how the org chart says it works. Who are the real decision makers? Where are the power centers? How do things actually get done? This knowledge is the foundation of everything else. Next, execution. Take on projects that let you demonstrate capability beyond your current role. Volunteer for complex problems. Deliver results that get noticed. Build a track record that makes people think of you when hard things need to happen. Don't just be good at your job. Be exceptional at solving problems that matter to people who matter. Then relationships. Systematically build connections across the organization. Not superficial networking, but genuine relationships based on mutual value. Help people. Make introductions. Share information that serves others. Build relationship capital that you can draw on when you need support, resources, or advocacy. Make yourself valuable to people beyond your immediate team. Control narrative carefully. When you communicate, think about framing. What story are you telling about events? How are you positioning successes and challenges? What interpretation are you encouraging? Shape perception strategically while appearing to just be reporting objectively. This is subtle, but it's powerful. Make your boss look good while ensuring your contributions are known to people who matter. Publicly credit your boss. Privately ensure that decision-makers understand your role. Build relationships with leadership where they recognize your capability without you having to claim it explicitly. Let your work speak, but make sure it's speaking to the right people. Finally, build options. Develop your skills. Build your external network. Create visibility beyond your organization. Make yourself someone who could leave and thrive. This isn't about planning to leave. It's about ensuring you're never trapped. And that optionality translates to internal power because you're operating from choice. When to make your move. Bacon knew when to push for formal recognition and when to keep accumulating informal power. The time to push is when the gap between your informal influence and your formal position becomes obvious to leadership, when you're regularly operating above your rank, when people consistently come to you with problems that should go to higher levels, when your network and influence clearly exceed your title. At that point, you're not asking for promotion as a favor. You're asking for organizational structure to reflect organizational reality. You're pointing out that there's a mismatch between how you're actually functioning and how you're formally positioned. And if you've built real power, if you've made yourself genuinely valuable and difficult to replace, this conversation usually goes well. If it doesn't, if your organization refuses to recognize your actual contribution despite clear evidence of your impact, that's when your optionality matters. Because you've built power that's portable. You can take your capabilities, your relationships, your reputation somewhere that will properly value them. And often, the threat of that, even if never explicitly stated, is enough to move organizations to proper recognition. The ultimate truth. Francis Bacon's 7 rules work because they're based on how power actually functions in organizational systems. Title is just a label. Real power is about control. control of information, execution, relationships, narrative, problem-solving capability, credit management, and personal optionality. Accumulate these forms of control, and your title becomes almost irrelevant. You're powerful regardless of rank. Your boss might have the corner office, but if you have the 7 forms of control Bacon identified, you're the one actually determining outcomes. They're the face. You're the power behind it. They have the title. You have the influence. And in the long run, influence matters more than title, because influence determines what actually happens, while title just determines what gets called what. This isn't about undermining anyone. It's about understanding reality. Organizations are complex systems where formal and informal power coexist. Most people only see and pursue formal power through official channels. But the people who understand and accumulate informal power often have more influence over actual outcomes. They're operating at a level their title doesn't reflect, and eventually, either their title catches up to their reality, or they take their power somewhere that properly recognizes it. The choice is yours. You can focus only on formal promotion and hope your organization eventually recognizes your worth. Or you can follow Bacon's 7 rules, accumulate real power regardless of title, and position yourself so that formal recognition becomes inevitable. One path makes you dependent on others to grant you power. The other path makes you powerful first and forces recognition to follow. Bacon chose the second path, and it made him one of the most influential men of his era despite never starting from a position of privilege or inheriting power. He built it, systematically, using principles that work just as well today as they did 400 years ago. The 7 rules are now yours. What you do with them determines whether you stay trapped in formal hierarchies waiting for permission to be powerful, or whether you take power on your own terms and let titles catch up to reality later. Your boss has their position. The question is, are you going to let that position limit you, or are you going to build power that makes their position irrelevant?